another fine podcast from the FIR Podcast Network.
This is Amp Up Your Digital Marketing, brought to you by GaggleAMP. Empower your employees, partners, and resellers to share your social media with the help of GaggleAMP. Amp Up Your Digital Marketing brings together the leading marketing practitioners to share how they are succeeding in today's digital landscape. On this episode of Amp Up Your Digital Marketing, we start a new series focused on podcasting as a marketing tool. First up in the series is Mark Schaefer, co-host of the popular podcast, The Marketing Companion. In this discussion, Mark talks about his tough decision to start a podcast. He shares some guidelines for deciding if a podcast is right for you and your brand, and talks about the value of podcasting in a changing digital marketing landscape. Let's listen in.
Welcome, I'm Glenn Gaudette, and today I'm speaking with Mark Schaefer. Mark, welcome to the show.
I'm so delighted to be here.
Awesome. Tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, I have a background in marketing. I worked in corporate marketing for about 27 years or so and started my own firm 9 years ago. I consult, I speak on the stage, and I blog. I have a podcast, which I know we'll be talking about today, and I've written 6 books on social media, basically social media marketing, although my new book, Known, is about how to establish a personal brand in the digital age today. So it was a bit of a pivot, so yeah, that's kind of me. And I teach at Rutgers University.
So, and you've been a podcaster since 2013, correct?
Right. Yeah. I started, it was a very difficult decision, actually, because in my heart, I'm a blogger. I started my blog in 2009, and I didn't want to do anything that would jeopardize the quality of that blog. And, podcasting, like any content creation, is a big commitment. And I didn't want to let my audience down on the blog. So I had to come up with kind of a format that I could live with, that would still be joyful to me. I think that's important to do, to create content that's going to make you joyful. Because if you're not having fun, your audience will be able to tell. Absolutely. And you just can't do that. So I decided my format, I would have a co-host. My co-host is Tom Webster, who's a brilliant man and a great friend. We had a wonderful relationship before we even started the podcast. And he with the added benefit that the guy is absolutely hilarious. And so that adds, I think our chemistry adds a special flavor to the show. That's kind of what we're known for, I think. And it also it took some of the burden away from me. As you know, really having a solo kind of presence on a podcast is hard work. So sharing the burden with Tom got me in a place where I thought, you know what, I'm going to do this. I want to learn about podcasting. I want to see where this goes. And it has been fun. I look forward to it every single time. And I think the audience can tell.
There seems to be a couple different approaches to podcasting, and you've made a conscious decision. So you've got you have a co-host. Mm-hmm. How often or do you have guests?
We very rarely have guests. I think in 4 years, we've had a guest maybe 3 times. Mm. And so, that having the guest is sort of a kind of a common format. And I think just the two of us doing a deep dive on a marketing topic is unique. Yes. And so that's kind of our niche. We were very mindful about that, and it's entertaining. We start off each show with a funny kind of bit. We'll promote some crazy product that we made up, or we'll comment on something in the news, or we kind of tease each other. So it usually always starts off with something kind of funny. And the other thing that's, I guess, I delight in is that our intro is different every week. And we have a guy doing intros for us, Scott Monty, and he's just a great creative mind, and he does impersonations, and whatever just strikes him funny, that's going to be the intro that week. We never know what's going to be coming.
It's interesting because podcast was, when it first came out, it was kind of edgy and unique, and then it seemed to cool down for a bit. And now it's really picking up a lot of steam again. And there's just so many different people doing podcasting. From your perspective, and I think you have a really good perspective on this, what's the decision process a company should go through to decide whether or not they want to get into podcasting, or just a marketing person getting into podcasting?
Well, marketing is all about maneuverability. You have to figure out how you can maneuver with the cards you're dealt. And so the cards you're dealt are, what is your existing competition? What are they doing? What are the underserved or unmet needs of your customers? What are you all about? What is unique? What is distinctive about you? What are you going to enjoy doing? You need to kind of look at this in a holistic perspective about making a decision to create a certain type of content. But, podcasts, I think they're growing for a couple of reasons. One is that now we have access to data plans and Wi-Fi, and we've got this smart device in our pocket that's more or less a radio now, a radio program, accessible anywhere. Podcasts are convenient because you can multitask while you're doing it. You can drive a car and comfortably listen to a podcast. Podcasts are becoming more important because you can't really skip the ads very easily. There are ways to do it, but generally people kind of listen to the ads more than what's going on in a lot of other channels right now. And I think the final reason is that people learn in different ways. They learn by reading, by listening, by viewing, by doing. And this learning by listening has been an underserved niche. And so now people are starting to discover podcasts. The people who love to learn by listening, they're turning on, they're tuning in, and that's really fueling this exciting growth.
In the discussions that you have on your podcast, you're talking about marketing issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of marketing, when we go back to kind of the basics, a lot of it has to do with the marketing mix. And so how do you see podcasting as part of that mix? And do you have some strong beliefs on whether or not podcasting should be audio only, audio and video, combination?
Well, the marketing mix, the traditional marketing mix is going through some cataclysmic changes right now, in that many of the dependable channels are going away, namely advertising. Advertising, we're moving, I think, toward an ad-free world. People avoid ads, they block ads. They're subscribing to services like SiriusXM and Netflix and Amazon, so they don't have to see ads. So we have to find new ways to connect with our audience, and certainly providing some value through rich content like a podcast might make sense. It's not for everybody. It's not for every business. It's not for every brand. It can't be about selling stuff. But, an example, I'm hosting a podcast for Dell. It's Dell's first podcast ever. It's called Luminaries. And I think this is a really wonderful example of how to be smart about creating content that fits for your audience. The podcast is all about digital transformation, the technological challenges, the human challenges, We're talking to some of the amazing experts in their company, and it's growing like crazy. And so I think that is smart because it reaches an audience that's hungry for this information and yet presents it in a human way. It's not selling servers. It's not selling, big, security systems. It's talking about the real challenges, real customers, and the human stories, including mistakes. And so it's something I'm very proud of and something that's really getting a lot of traction at Dell. And I think it's a leading example of how companies can use this in their marketing.
Now, I can channel our audience a little bit right now because I know one of the questions that might be popping up, at least in some people's heads, are, well, how did you get them to see the light and to buy into a podcast? Or did they just come to you and it was already pre-sold in the organization?
Well, I had an idea for a podcast that I wanted to do where I would interview really, technology leaders who I admire. I mean, my favorite event of all time is South by Southwest. And I love just listening to people talk about artificial intelligence and robotics. And I had this idea where I would just interview these brilliant people who I admire. And I was mentioning this to some of my friends at Dell, and they said, we really like that idea. Why don't you do that for us? And they had never done a podcast before, but the timing was good because they were having internal discussions about including a podcast in the mix. And they liked the idea of using an external host, really to kind of bring some credibility to it.
Right.
And I've taken risks. I've asked some very provocative questions, and to Dell's credit, they haven't edited one single second of those podcasts. They've been very courageous, and it makes it a great show. So I really didn't have to sell. I mean, it was a good idea at the right time, and I had a long relationship with Dell, so there was always already trust there.
Well, I think with podcasting, like anything, there's the content issue. And, whether you're writing a blog or you're creating podcast episodes, you always have to have this constant flow of ideas, guests, or just topics that you're going to be discussing if you're not going to do the guest thing.
Mm-hmm.
How do you go about that, both from the point of view of the podcast that you do with Tom, as well as the podcast that you're doing with Dell?
Well, it takes discipline. It really does, because consistency is important. And it's hard to be consistently interesting. And I think that is that is the promise that we have to have in our heads every time we do a podcast or every time we do any kind of content. The promise in my head is I will never let you down. If I'm going to publish a book, a podcast, a blog post, a video, it's going to be worth your time every time. That is my brand. So you do have to work at being consistent, and it requires discipline. It requires the discipline to allow yourself to absorb content, absorb ideas from lots of places. And you have to also have the discipline to write down ideas. We are bombarded with ideas every day. It might be something that one of your listeners is hearing right now. It could be something that you watch on a video, something that you read in a magazine, you hear on the radio. It could be a question that somebody asked you, and you just have to go through your day, every day, thinking about these prompts and how could this be a piece of content? It could just be a headline you see someplace. Then the third discipline is write it down. You have to capture it or it's going to go away. And just keep recording idea. And then the last discipline is you need to schedule time to do this. You need quiet, undisturbed time. Then you pull out your list of ideas and you pick out the one that seems most fun to riff on. And I think that's something that anybody can do, but it does require a different mindset. It requires thinking almost like a reporter or a journalist or a feature writer, and being aware of the ideas that are around us every day.
And it really is a muscle you develop over time, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I've seen over time is when you start capturing ideas. It's interesting because in the beginning you don't necessarily think of yourself as an idea generator, and then you start capturing ideas, and you actually start coming up with ideas more frequently when you have that outlet to capture them and then ultimately kind of vet them. So totally agree with that. That's something that I think every marketer should be honing that muscle.
And
Be-
you do get better over time.
you
And
do,
you
yeah.
also get better because you get feedback from your audience. People will say, "Oh, wow, that was really wonderful. That was extraordinary. That had an impact on me." And you go, "Oh, really? Well, maybe I'll do more of that." And I have this saying that we create content, but content also creates us. That as we get that feedback, we're forged into something new, into something better.
So you've got somebody out there, a marketer who's interested in creating a podcast, and they're starting from scratch. What are the kinds of things that you thought of when you're starting, both, back in 2013, as well as some of the things you learned and now doing with Dell, to kind of get the word out there and to get some audience engagement?
It really starts with your point of differentiation. It's a very noisy world, and you just can't do what everybody else is doing. And actually, I mean, this might be interesting for your listeners, but I have a new book out called Known that walks people through this process. There's exercises in the book to help you define what's your only eye, what's distinctive about you. And it also gives you some ways that you can do a little research to figure out what's already out there. Where do you fit into this information ecosystem? And it is a noisy world. It's a competitive world. But, Glenn, an interesting perspective is that in the big picture, the internet is just beginning. Podcasting is just beginning. There is still an enormous amount of opportunity. And even in crowded markets like fitness or fashion or food or marketing, where there are tons of content out there, there's still ways to differentiate. People are doing it every day. So one idea might be to go through some of the exercises in the book to figure out, how do you fit in? How are you going to be different in this ecosystem? And is there an audience big enough to matter? Is there an audience big enough to help you achieve your goals? Whatever they are. Do you want to monetize your audience? Are you doing it just to learn? Are you doing it to spread your ideas? Are you doing it to get the attention of a certain organization or a certain group? So you kind of have to backward engineer what your podcast is about based on your goals, what's available, what are your talents, and figuring out how you fit in.
And one of the things that we've seen, because I've been doing before I started this podcast, I was doing a political podcast. So I'm going back many years, and the thing that podcasting gave to me was patience. And I wonder if you had the same experience.
Well, that's another profound learning I had from writing this latest book, because I interviewed people who have become known in their fields, and there are many podcasters in the book. And I interviewed nearly 100 people for this book. And at the end of the interview, my last question always was, if you could give one piece of advice for someone who's trying to become known in their field by creating content, what would it be? And almost every person said consistency, resilience, tenacity. People quit too soon.
Yep.
It takes time. It takes patience, incredible patience, vicious consistency. And as long as you see signs that it's working, you got to keep going. If someone leaves you a comment, a review, they send you a little nice note through an email, you get asked to be on another podcast, you get asked to contribute to a blog post, a roundup post or something like that. If people just start asking you questions based on what you had on your podcast, those are all little signs that you're moving ahead, that it's working. And as long as you keep seeing those signs, keep on going. It may take a year, it may take a couple years for your brand to really lift off. And you just got to keep, I think consistency, Glenn, is more important than brilliance. It's more important than having that big idea. Just learning, growing, evolving, and not giving up and being reliable to your audience means something.
Agreed. Excellent advice. Mark, if there's one thing that people could do today, if they're really truly thinking about podcasting, what would that one thing be that you recommend?
Well, I think the one thing we haven't talked about that is kind of embedded in everything we've discussed is you have to start. We talked about consistency. We talked about evolving. We talked about finding your niche, but you have to take your best shot and you can't overthink it. And at some point you just have to start.
Yep.
6 months from now, you're going to be better than you are today. You're going to be more comfortable. You're going to be more efficient. You're going to be more confident. You're going to have a better view of what your niche is, but you'll never get to that amazing point unless you start. And so you can't be perfect. You won't be perfect, but you can start. And that takes some courage to do. Put yourself out there and see how it goes, and give yourself a year to watch for those measures that something is happening. But you just got to take your best shot and start.
And you will be your own worst critic. That's something I learned.
Generally, the fear of people criticizing you and being harsh about you, generally that's way, way overblown. The people on their web are generally pretty supportive and nice if you're creating value and just trying your best to do a good job.
Yep. Mark, this has been great. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to learn about your podcast, your books, or reach out to you?
It's really easy to find me. If you can remember Businesses Grow, you can find me. So if you Google businessesgrow.com, you can find my podcast, my blog, my books, and all my social contacts. And I'd love to connect with your listeners, and please say hi.
Awesome. Mark, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thanks for listening. We'd love your feedback. If you have any ideas for the show, would like to suggest a guest, or even just connect with the producers of the show, you can send an email to podcast@GaggleAMP.com. Hungry for more? Check out Amplify, the Employee Advocacy and Engagement Podcast, or log on to learningscenter.gaggleamp.com/ampup. Whether you're just starting an employee advocacy program, already have one up and running, or are looking to go big, the GaggleAMP Learning Center has just what you need. Go to learningscenter.gaggleamp.com/ampup to get started today.